Hello, this is Chris Gray, your host, with our new show, The Captain's Table. Back in the 1800s, when ships would sail on long voyages, the captain of the ship would invite passengers he considered to be the most interesting to sit at his table. This was an elevated table in the dining room, and he would talk to them while the other passengers listened to the conversation. This was one of the original radio or podcasts. We are trying to bring that tradition back with our show today, and we have a very distinguished guest, Pat Nolan. How are you today, Pat?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Let me just tell you.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Let me tell you a few things about Pat. Pat is the director of the American Conservative Union Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Previously, he served for 15 years in the California State Assembly and was Assembly Republican leader for 4 years. He's a leader on behalf of victims' rights and was awarded the Victims Advocate Award by parents of murdered children. So welcome to the show, Pat.
Thank you, Chris.
So I want to start off the show today with you giving a short background of how you got involved in politics and the terrible story about you and Tommy Trojan.
Yeah. Well, I got involved in politics at a young age. My parents were, active Republicans, not running for office or anything, but, the dining room table was a place of discussion. We had many friends of different political views, and, it was always a healthy give and take, but my parents were conservative, and I shared their opinions as I grew and matured and came to think on my own. I felt they were right, and I helped put door hangers on for Nixon in 1960. A neighbor lady took me around to do that, and then I was active for Goldwater. I was the captain of 2 precincts in Burbank for him. And then in 1966, I founded the Burbank Youth for Reagan. And through that, met all sorts of interesting people. Dana Rohrabacher went on to become a speechwriter for Reagan and then a member of Congress. Sean Steele, who was the LA County Youth for Reagan chairman. Dana had been South Bay Youth for Reagan chair. And anyway, Sean is now the Republican National Committeeman for California. His wife, Michelle, is a member of Congress. I also met Reagan's campaign team, Lynn Nofziger, and then later Ed Meese, with whom I became very close. Lynn Nofziger was sort of my mentor. He really took me under his wing, would give me projects to do, but also was a heck of a lot of fun to be with. And I learned a whole lot from him. So
Ed Meese was from up here now, Alameda County.
Yes, he was a prosecutor in the DA's office, and then went on to be Reagan's cabinet secretary as governor, and then, of course, attorney general under Reagan when he was president. I'm still in touch with Ed. It's amazing his continued strength and vigor, and I'm jealous. He's really still very active and just a kind man. Somebody once said that, I think this is an accurate description, he's a combination of Santa Claus and St. Patrick.
That's good.
Such a good, fun man. But anyway, at the Republican convention in '76, I was very active in trying to boost Reagan for president. Lynn would assign me tasks, and also there were several Young Americans for Freedom members. I helped organize them to do things to help Reagan. It was when he was narrowly defeated by Ford. And back there, when I was there, I heard that my assembly member, Mike Antonovich, was planning to run for lieutenant governor. And I talked to Mike, and he didn't endorse me. He encouraged me to run. And I came back and put together a campaign. I didn't have any money, so it was all volunteers. But, I had friends that were very astute politically. And while they were young in years, they were long in experience. And I ended up winning my primary and then served in the assembly. Jerry Brown was governor then, but George Gugmajian 2 years later became governor, and we had a terrific relationship. And in 1980, Reagan was elected president. And, I was back at the White House on many occasions to brief him on different issues. And I'm proud to say I donated my time teaching horseback riding to kids in a group called the California Rangers. And they rode, their color guard and drill team rode in the inaugural parade for Reagan.
Wow.
He was quite a horseman himself. And I'm very proud of those young people that were able to represent California in the inaugural parade.
I see. And Tommy Trojan wasn't in the inaugural parade?
Oh, yeah. You threw that little insult my way. California's bear is losing all its hair.
What?
Teeth are out of Scott the Gout. You don't know what it's all about. Anyway, I wrote it, Tommy Trojan.
You're not referring to the USC band that only knows how to play one song, are you?
Well, actually, it's more than one, including the premiere of Tusk. Fleetwood Mac joined with the USC marching band, the Spirit of Troy, and issued that hit. So yes, and the tribute to Troy drives our enemies nuts, but it's played often because we score so many times and we outrun and outwork our opponents.
Mm-hmm. Also known as the best team money can buy, but I understand. So let's
I was gonna go to a UC school, but then my dad got a job, so I could go to a good school.
Okay, Pat. we could continue this vein, but then they wouldn't learn about your political career in Sacramento.
Yeah. Oh, one thing though, my mom was a graduate of UCLA, the first class in Westwood. Yeah, and
you're infected on both sides.
Yeah, we always would tell her that each generation improves on the previous one. But yeah, she was Phi Beta Kappa there. At that point, there were only two buildings on campus, the administration building and the library, and just plywood in between. Now it's a beautiful campus. But one of her roommates in this sorority was Helen Topping, who became wife of Norman Topping, the president of USC, when I went there. So it's a small world in Southern California.
Yes, it is. So tell me about some of the legislative challenges when you were in office in Sacramento in the good old days.
Yeah. Well, there were both problems of policy with our disagreements with the Democrats on issues, but within the Republican Party, there's also a cultural class of the veteran members were more of the go along, get along type, and the freshman class, of which I was a part in '78, actually was a majority of the caucus. We gained so many seats, and we said we were elected to try to change things, not go along with things. And so there was some internal upheaval, and about 6 months into the term, we dumped the Republican leader and elected Carol Hallett, first female leader of any party in the legislature. She was a terrific leader. But the legislature was divided then. We were a minority, but a strong minority. Republicans mattered in those days. But there was also a different atmosphere where, the Democrats were our opponents, not our enemy. And there were issues we could work together on one by one where neither of us had to sacrifice our principles, but could work together for the common good. And so, even though I'm very conservative, I worked on legislation with John Vasconcellos, probably the most liberal member of the legislature, with John Burton, with Art Agnos. And it was a different atmosphere then when nowadays politics is very toxic.
Very polarizing.
Yeah, and we went at it hammer and tong on issues, but there wasn't the sense that that we were that somehow our opponents were evil. And we'd go out, hang out at Frank Fat's or Eilish's, or you go to movies together out in near the fairgrounds. Members of both parties just enjoying each other and friendships, and that sadly doesn't occur very much today.
Many people theorize today that social media and also the press basically almost taking sides, expressing one viewpoint or the other, really has led to a lot of the polarization, and that a lot of people only are getting one side of the news. And it makes it so it's hard to have common goals. And it vilifies and dehumanizes the opposition. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely do. On the social media part, it's so easy to rip off a quick tweet or comment on Facebook that is harsh. You wouldn't say that to somebody's face, but through the separation of that physically there, people say mean and really hateful things in some cases that they wouldn't say to somebody's face. And it's hard to be harsh with somebody you've broken bread with.
Yes.
Jesus many times, used eating with people that were in conflict, and even the Last Supper with his apostles. And I'm told that doesn't happen anymore. But we used to go out to dinner, all the time together. But then also the press, yes, has, and there were journalists that were liberal then, and we knew who they were, and some were conservative, but they didn't let that drive their stories. Of course, the liberals took a liberal bent to it. But, they give me a fair shot at, quoting me, contacting me for my position on issues. And I find now that it's only gotcha journalism, when they think they've got something that's confrontational as opposed to gathering information to inform the public through their articles to really represent. And often today now the focus is on what they call the horse race. Who's ahead, who's gaining, who's losing, but not on the policy. And there's very little discussion of the differences in positions that people take. And so the public gets turned off because all they hear is this, bashing of each other, and they don't hear the very real differences debated fairly and openly so they can make up their own mind.
I definitely agree. In fact, words like statesmanship, and credibility, policy, don't even come into discussion very often. And I think that's sad because it doesn't let the public know what the real issues are, and it just vilifies the opposition. So then you're less likely to listen to them, even if they have a good idea, because they're made out as villains and dishonest.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, Ross Johnson used to tease me and say I was an apostle because I had very strong and well-formed beliefs. And he said I was always trying to convert people. But, I felt I was a pretty good, legislative author, how to, sail the seas of the legislature. But it was always with policy in mind. And one time, in fact, we were in the speaker's conference room and talking about the budget. Willie slammed his hand down on the table and said, "God damn it, Nolan, this is about politics. Stop your good government shit."
Yep.
But the budget is policy. How you spend the money and for what and why, that's all policy. It affects everybody's lives.
Right.
The taxpayer and the recipient.
As a former campaign consultant and chief of staff, I will tell you that the public reacts well to people they feel are good government people. And back then, I felt there was more trust of what the elected officials do because they thought they were interested in promoting the common good, not just themselves or their own ideology.
Yeah.
So, Pat,
and when I would get constituent correspondents that disagreed with me, I'd call them on the phone, and it stunned people. And people would write these harsh letters, and I'd call and talk to them. And I'll tell you, they were so stunned that a legislature cared about what they had to say. And I think that's the problem with it. I think most of the public thinks people in office don't care about what they would say. And so virtually every time at the end of the conversation, they'd thank me for calling. And even if we continued to disagree, they had respect for me, and I was willing to engage in a civil conversation with them about our differences. And that doesn't happen so much now.
No, I think the personal interaction, like you mentioned with the constituent service and also knocking on doors during campaigns, let people see who you were and that you cared. Mm-hmm. And I think it's totally different today, and especially I think after the pandemic. In the pandemic, you really couldn't knock on doors. So the most you could do is have a phone bank calling them, which most people feel is more disruptive and not as personal as somebody looking you in the face.
And also the people working the phone banks aren't political. They're just paid. And I remember I'd had a phone bank. I always walked precincts, but I had a phone bank. And one of my constituents called and said, "Pat, you got to talk to your phone bank." They referred to Governor Duke Majian. But of course, it was pronounced Duke Majian.
Yep,
I called the phone bank operator and said, "This actually insults people when you call and they can't pronounce his name." So anyway.
Pat, how did you become the minority leader in Sacramento?
Well, Bob Naylor was after Carol Hallett was the Republican leader, and he was a very nice guy, a graduate of Stanford.
Boo!
And
a common enemy.
Yes. Yeah, the cardinal now, the color.
Yes.
Anyway.
I don't understand how the color and the tree equate to Stanford University.
No, yeah. The SC band once mimicked, because of course the Stanford band was always wild and crazy. But we had a tree go out on the lawn or on the field, and then a dog come out and water the tree as part of our halftime.
That's classic.
they didn't appreciate that. But
well, the students
anyway.
voted in robber barons, which
Yeah.
we all thought was
right.
appropriate and would have served them well, and it was historic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the school
Yeah.
the school came up with cardinal by themselves.
Yeah. It's
Sad.
but yeah, the student body had a right. It's such a unique name. That would really distinguish them, and it is the history of Stanford.
Yep.
Anyway, it's called the Leland Stanford Junior University. We'd always say, "Oh, you have a degree from a junior university. You can get into a real one." But,
Well, it's just like UCLA, we call the junior university because it's
when my mom's there, they didn't even call it UCLA. It was University of California Southern Branch.
Yeah, that's appropriate.
Anyway.
So anyway, Pat, we were talking about your speaking. Yes.
Yeah. Bob was a nice guy, but he wanted to please everybody. And there was a broad spectrum of views in the caucus, but by trying to please everybody, we didn't stand for much. And we felt we were let down because he wasn't be the opposing party. As Tom McClintock, one of our most valuable members, said, the duty of the opposition is to oppose, not to go along. And so the conservatives in the caucus, with some moderates, were frustrated that there wasn't much policy coming from the caucus. United and elected me Republican leader, and I took more straightforward. We put out long before the Contract of America. We put out our agenda of opportunity, laying out proposals that we would advance, and also, even though Willie Brown and I disagreed philosophically, Jess Unruh told me, you need to know the rules of the assembly so you fight over issues, not over parliamentary procedure. And with Willie, I said, look, let's allow debate on the floor. Let's have a contest of ideas. Let's not get caught up in, cheap shotting with motions to close debate before anybody's spoken and things like that. Let's have it out, and a real contest of ideas will be healthy for everybody. And so that's the way we operated for the first couple of years I was minority leader. But then Willie, after we picked up 3 more seats and we were within 5 votes of a majority, Willie changed and did all the cheap tricks to try to keep on power. But I think most people would say that even though I was, much more conservative than a lot of people, I knew how to get the job done. We'd have a budget. We'd pass good legislation. We'd find ways to advance the common good, but not do damage to our institutions. And I think as under my leadership, I think many of the Democrats said that it was more pleasant to work in the assembly because, again, it was a debate of ideas, not of just pure politics.
It sounds healthier. So let us move on to the scandal that is called shrimp scam. And you have a unique perspective because of what happened in a knowledge that most people in California and in the nation aren't aware of. And I think there's some lessons to be learned for the general public from it too.
I had been, I'd grown up as a kid on Crenshaw Boulevard, a neighborhood in transition, as they say. And I saw the poverty there and the difficulty that families had, and crime was really a big issue even back then. And I Jack Kemp and I supported the idea of enterprise zones, where that perhaps the inner cities suffered not from neglect of the government, but too much government. The bureaucracy was stifling any chance to advance there. And so I sponsored enterprise zones, and Maxine Waters had her targeted enterprise development zone, TED zone, and they were competing, both passed, and it was a good chance to show that. But I clearly shown my interest in helping bring jobs to the central city, helping to clear away the bureaucratic underbrush that was so difficult for inner city residents to start a business. City Hall is really kind of a foreign place to them. And so we got the one-stop permitting, where you didn't have to go from department to department to department if you wanted to open a pizza shop, but you could go to one stop and all the permits would be handled there by then. So that was natural for me. And there were, Gwenmore carried a bill that a shrimp company in, I think it was Georgia, somewhere in the South, wanted to build a shrimp processing plant in West Sacramento, which, was within sight of the capital, but an area of extreme poverty. Just really no jobs there for the residents. So they said they wanted to build that shrimp processing plant, but that the bonding requirement to get a small business loan, they had to have $10 million in capital. And they were asking that instead they only have to have $5 million in capital to get the loan. Well, to me, that's a no-brainer. They're going to provide 50 entry-level jobs, and they've got $5 million to invest in capital. Why turn them down? I asked, what's the reason behind the 10% capital requirement? And frankly, everybody said, well, we just picked it out of the air. And so I said, as most of the legislature did, so we all voted for it. It passed out of both houses overwhelming, and got to the governor's desk. And unbeknownst to us, the businessmen were really FBI agents posing as businessmen, and they were trying to find corruption in the Capitol. What I discovered through the whole process is the FBI didn't understand the legislative process at all. They, they thought that on a bill that when they went in posing as these businessmen, that people would say, "Oh, well, you give me $25,000 in cash and I can help you." Well, that's not the way the legislature works. And they also presume they were so ignorant of state law that they thought that a corporation that contributed to a politician or the elected official, a politician, was illegal. Well, federally, it is for a corporation, but in virtually all of the states and in California at the time, it was totally illegal for a corporation to give to a legislator. So they went in, ignorant of California law. Also, there was a requirement that they register with the Fair Political Practices Commission. They didn't do that. They were in violation of that. They lied and said they had Dun & Bradstreet's rating that was high. That was a lie. Anyway, but the bill passed easily. And,
because it was a good bill.
Right. It made sense. If you're going to bag a bill, it's got to be a bill that nobody would vote for that's honest and has to be bribed to do it. Well, in this case, nobody had to bribe me to do it. I voted for it, and my colleagues voted for it. Well, they scurried and asked for an appointment with Governor Deukmejian and said to him, this passed both houses, but it's part of our FBI manual that we can't have it signed into law, so you need to veto the bill. Well, Deukmejian's chief of staff and his legislative director had recommended he sign the bill. It was good. So the FBI convinced him to lie to the public and say it was a bad bill, and therefore, he vetoed it. He's returning it without his signature, but that was a lie. His staff, everybody was for it. And it was only after I'd voted for the bill 7 times and months later that these phony businessmen wanted to meet with me to contribute to my campaign. Well, again, I'd voted for it months earlier and 7 times over a couple of years' time as it went through the process. So they wanted to meet with me. And in fact, I kept saying, just tell them to, contribute and they can have tickets to a dinner. No, they want to meet with you personally. Well, of course, in retrospect, they wanted to get me on film. And, they have this grainy black and white film shot at a very low level. And, they were giving this rah-rah speech. Boy, we want to see you as the leader. It really grinds our gears that Willie Brown is, the Speaker of the Assembly. We want you. And then they said, well, as per our agreement, and handed an envelope to my aide. Well, as per agreement, they told me they wanted, they told Karen, and Karen told me they wanted to contribute $10,000. So, okay, that's per agreement. Didn't seem any wrong. Well, later they tried to characterize that. The agreement was that they would give $10,000 in return for my support. But how do you bribe somebody retroactively?
That doesn't make sense.
I voted for, yeah, but the jury pool had been so tainted because they had gotten conviction of some other members that when we did a poll of prospective jurors, when asked, Pat Nolan is accused of taking bribes. Is he guilty? 67% said guilty without hearing any facts. None. So we made a motion for change of venue. Judge Garcia, who just was a really dyspeptic person, just in a foul mood all the time, and he turned it down. Most judges would have granted that. It was so clear that I couldn't get a fair hearing there. But anyway, God had better plans for me. I ended up going to prison for 29 months. My children were young. The daughters were 4 and 3, and son was just 10 months old. And they charged me with 6 different felonies with mandatory minimums. So I was looking at possibly 21-year sentence with the jury pool so stacked against me. So I pleaded guilty and said I did something I didn't do in general terms. I just said I operated my office, to get contributions, which of course is a farce because everybody knew if they brought up contributions when talking about a bill, we'd end the conversation. Anyway, but I did that.
So you pled to one count because it minimized the potential length of the sentence. Right. So it was a plea bargain.
So I was in prison 29 months, whereas I could have been up to 21 years. I would have missed the entire childhood of my children. And while I was proud of my work in the legislature, I thought I was one of the good guys there. And even Democrats said when they charged me that it was ridiculous. But I figured as valuable as my reputation was and my ability to practice law, even more important to me were my young children.
Yes.
So I was away about 2.5 years, and then I was able to rejoin them. Yeah.
Just to back up a little bit, this was as I remember, they convicted people of both parties, and they only went after certain people because the overwhelming majority of the legislature voted for these same bills, but they just cherry picked who they wanted to prosecute.
They picked, and And in fact, I mean, there are all sorts of constitutional issues. Alan Robbins, who did shake down people, they convinced him to plead guilty and to then wear a wire against other legislators. And they allowed him to remain, even though he agreed to plead guilty, to remain as chairman of the insurance committee in the Senate and set bills. They told him what bills to set. Well, think of the Constitution, a federal and a part of the federal executive, the FBI and the Department of Justice, is controlling the votes and the agenda
of the chair
of a Senate committee.
Yes.
You know, and as my attorney said to me, if they can do it for one, why not 21, which is the majority of the Senate? You know, I mean, this is truly astounding that they do it. And of course, they were so naive. They thought that they'd catch people saying, oh, you've got to give me money. And they didn't do that, but then they just chose people to go after. And like me, well, he voted for the bill and we contributed. Ergo, it was a bribe, even though, you know, it was all prior to the contribution.
And perfectly legal under California law. But the typical jury...
And they violated California law. In fact, the Fair Political Practices Commission was about to file an action the day that they raided my office. The FPPC had slipped a notice under the door of their front company, the offices, telling them they were in violation and that they had to appear, you know, to answer the charges. Well, of course, that was, dropped once the whole thing. But they were in violation of California law.
So, Pat, to move on to your experience in prison, which as a legislator, as an attorney, and even as a Trojan, must have been a terrible transition. How did you find the California prison that you were in?
Yeah, it was a federal prison in Dublin, California. It was humiliating. The staff went out of their way to try to humiliate me, and my counselor, unfortunately, was especially vicious and vituperative. But it was all through the whole thing, from the moment that they indicted me. A lady from Assemblyman Hoag's office across the hall stepped out and pressed into my hand as my wife and I were going down to the press conference room to face the lion's den, you know, of the press. There's Diana Card was her name, and she'd written out Jeremiah 29:11. For I have plans for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. And as tough as that was to be indicted and have my reputation besmirched, there was the feeling all through it that God's hand was on me. And I didn't understand why this was being done to me, but He did make it clear to myself and my wife many times that, you know, stick with it, you know, as Joseph said to his brothers who tried to kill him, send him into slavery, you know. He said, what man intended for evil, God intended for good. And so that's the attitude in which I went in. And, you know, there were enough bright lights there, a couple of staff members who were really good-hearted people, other prisoners that I never would have met, you know, as a legislator, were decent people. They may have done something wrong, some of them relatively minor, some major. But I saw, you know, one of the things later when I worked at Prison Fellowship, one of the things that's often said in the ministry is the ground is level at the foot of the cross. We're all brothers and sisters. All, as St. Paul said, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So I looked around, and these were my brothers, and there were some jerks there, obviously, but there were some genuinely nice people. And my lawyer had said that. He said, you'll be surprised, Pat. You'll run into some really genuine folks there. And I did. And he'd been the acting U.S. attorney for the Eastern District, and then had gone into private practice. So he knew. He'd sent people to prison and saw that, they were able to to get along with people inside prison. I think when I went in, the inmates, of course, knew that I was coming in. There were TV cameras there to catch me being surrendered and stuff. But they expected me to sort of lord it over them. And when they saw I was a regular guy, I'd keep my mouth shut and do my work that was assigned to me, and that I'd try to help them out. And, there's a phrase in prison, good looking out. When, you do a solid favor for somebody, and they saw that, I treated them just like I was their equal, not superior. They warmed up, and I made some good friendships that stayed in touch for years. After one of the guys that was my roommate for a while, I'm still in touch with. Others sadly have died since then, but anyway, it was it was a searing experience. Being away from my family, my wife, and my children, was very difficult. But it's more than just your family. When you're convicted, it's like you're cut off from your family, from your job, from your community, from your church, from your friends, and you're like an amputee. And then you're tossed into this roiling cauldron of anger and bitterness, because that really is the tempo of the prison: anger and bitterness.
Yes.
And it's tough to endure. But again, God's hand was on me. He allowed me to go through it, and always with the thought, well, there's a pony in here somewhere in this room of manure.
So when you were about to get out, how did that opportunity present itself?
Yeah. It's really funny. Again, it was totally God. I'd had a couple of job offers, and they were, financially they'd be good. But I'd always been involved in a cause since I was young, trying to improve things. And these would have just been profit-based. And so I was struggling with what I could do that would use my talents, but also my passion to explain to others what I'd seen and how we could improve the system. And one day I was walking the track, praying intensely. I was only 2 weeks from being released, and I got called to the guard station, and they said, Nolan, report to Control A. Well, I lived in Dorm B, so Control A would be a disciplinary thing. And I thought, what's, chicken thing are they after me now? But I got there, and the guard said, here, you got a phone call. Well, they don't take phone calls for people in prison, But he'd written it out on a Post-it note. It said Jim Schrader, Prison Fellowship. And here, I went and returned the call, and they said, have you heard of Justice Fellowship? I said, yeah, I really, admire what you guys are doing. They said, well, we're looking for a president and CEO. Would you be interested in interviewing with us? So here, just 2 weeks from being released, was this job that potential that knit together my legal training, my leadership in the legislature, and my time in prison to go alongside Chuck Colson to advocate for reforms in the prison system. It was when my wife told her brother about the job, he said, "Well, this is a made-up job, isn't it?" It's just too good to be true, but it was. And so I made that transition. The number of people that walk out of prison with a job is so minuscule. And yet here I had this job, and, it was right up my alley. I was able to still be involved in the cause and try to improve, our society. And it was a wonderful experience. And then the chance to work with Chuck Colson, who, he was like an older brother to me, really took me under his wing. I learned so much from him.
Maybe you could let people know who Chuck Colson was, if they're not familiar.
Yeah. Chuck used to laugh that the longer time went, nobody knew who he was. He'd been Nixon's counsel and had the office right next to the president, right outside the Oval Office. And when Watergate came up, it was a tough time for all of them there. He was charged, and he pled guilty to one crime of leaking an FBI file to the press. It was the file of this from the FBI had stolen from Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office that showed he was mentally unstable. So Chuck pleaded guilty to that and went to prison. And while he was in prison, he did his time. And the men, he like me, became friends with several of the men. They said, Chuck, when you get out, please don't forget us. And he said, I won't. And when he got out again, he had plenty of job offers, but instead he founded Prison Fellowship to reach out to try to help prisoners, their families, their victims, to heal everybody involved in crime that's affected by crime. And it was my blessing that he built this ministry and invited me to come alongside him to do the advocacy part of the mission.
Wow, that's a tremendous opportunity, and it went, like you said, right up your alley on your passions on serving the public and on prison reform. So what are some of the prison reform issues that you've worked on and been successful with?
Yeah. First thing, right as I got out, Harry Reid was trying to limit the religious rights of prisoners. He wanted to create a second class of people where normally if there's an infringement on your liberty, the only way it's justified is that the government has a compelling interest and they do it in the narrowest way. He instead wanted to say, as long as it was a law of general applicability, prisoners, had no rights. And that was a tough fight. But, it's sort of like, God threw me in the deep end of the pool because it was right there as an issue. And because of Chuck, I had access to good people in both parties in both houses. And so we organized a breakfast in John Ashcroft's office with 11 senators there to, organize to try to protect the religious liberty of inmates. And I organized the press conference with the two authors of what became the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, Ted Kennedy and John Ashcroft. And, in the legislature, I always tried to, what I called, bedposts, get the left and the right together on something. And that was a great combination of Kennedy and Ashcroft uniting to say, Harry Reid, you're wrong on this. And actually, it was a winning combination. We had similar left and right in the House, and the bill passed. So that was sort of, earning my stripes right away. But then Gene Guerrero, who worked then for a Soros initiative, had worked with us on that. He said, next thing we need to do, we need to work on something involving prisoners getting out. Not much is being done to prepare them for reentry. And so we, put together a coalition to pass the Second Chance Act. And it was, signed by President Bush, saying America's the land of second chances. We believe in redemption. So then the prison rape issue it's a scandal that over 10% of inmates are raped while they're in prison, and about half of them are by staff. And it just was, they pretended, everybody jokes about it on late night, but nobody was doing anything to prevent it. And so again, coalition formed, and we put together Jeff Sessions and Ted Kennedy to do it, and the Prison Rape Elimination Pact passed unanimously with both houses, even though people had predicted when we started, nobody cares about prisoners. This is dead on arrival.
Pat, tell me real briefly what that last piece of legislation actually does to prevent prison rapes.
Yeah. First of all, it's the government takes away prisoners' right to defend themselves. Of course, they can't have weapons, not only just firearms. They can't have a knife or a shank or anything. We tell them where they have to live. They don't get to choose who they're in with in the cell or in the cell block. They don't control, the inmates can't control whether, when and where they take showers. And oftentimes, the rapists, remove the light bulb so it's dark, and they assault, the people. So really prisoners are defenseless. And so the government has an obligation, absolute moral obligation, to try to stop them from being raped. And so the bill set up a commission to come up with standards to recommend what prisons need to do to reduce the number of prison rapes. And I was appointed by the Speaker of the House to a 7-member commission to come up with those guidelines for the states and for the federal prison to try to reduce the number of prison rapes. I'm sad to say that prisons are still resisting those. Technically, they're supposed to comply, but like here in Arizona, it's been 3 years without even filing a report as required by it. So it hasn't had the dramatic impact that we wanted, but it at least said, put on record, stop joking about this. This is serious, especially people that are small and maybe effeminate. They're prey. They're predators out for them. And can you imagine the horror of being raped? And prison culture is odd. It's different than anything else. And in prison culture, once you've been, quote, turned out, once you've been raped, you're then fair game for anybody to rape you. And if you don't want to be raped every night, you choose a boyfriend that'll be your protector, but that get to keep you as their mate in prison. That's terrible that would happen under the eyes of the prison officials.
Yes.
And there have been some prison officials that have done a great job, but just not most of them.
Okay, so what challenges are you working on today?
Yeah, in fact, just yesterday I testified for the Arizona Senate Judiciary Committee on a bill. Arizona has a policy that if someone does their time in prison and comes out, they're still prohibited from getting most occupational licenses. And, that's just counterproductive. It makes no sense. So this is a bill that says that they can apply for those licenses, and if their crime doesn't relate to that professional license, they're entitled to it. And unfortunately, it was, quote, held in committee because there were a bunch of, I think, ridiculous what ifs that caused people to pause. But we're trying to pass that because all the studies show that people that are employed are much less likely to commit another crime. Federally, of those who had their parole revoked, 80% were unemployed. Only 20% had jobs.
Well, that makes sense because they're not going to be as desperate.
Exactly. And so my point was, why? Because somebody might do something bad, would you present the vast majority of them from finding productive work where they can earn money, support their family, pay taxes, contribute to society, be good neighbors? Instead, unemployed, they're idle. And, as my mom said, idle hands are the devil's playground. They have time on hand. The tendency is, with no income and them, with nothing to do, they tend to fall in back with their old crowd. And that leads to drug use and petty crimes. That means more victims and more dangerous communities. So why on earth would we do this? It just is counterproductive to prevent them from finding good paying jobs. For instance, one of the licenses here is barber and cosmetologist. Well, in prison, they don't have barbers. The inmates cut your hair. And that's a skill many develop, especially, cornrows and braiding and things like that. They're very proficient at. But under the law now, they're prevented from getting a barber and cosmetologist license. I mean, that's insane. What danger is that to the public, But
doesn't make common
sense. So no, it flies in the face of common sense. But anyway, I'm a stubborn guy, and I'm not going to let this hold us up. All the bills that I mentioned that we passed took at least 5 years to pass. So I've just learned you got to suck it up and hit the line again.
Pat Nolan.
So that's what I'm going to do.
Pat Nolan, please keep up the good fight. You've made a difference in both the legislature and on prison reform issues, and I certainly appreciate it. I hope our listeners do today on Kaptain's Table. And I really want to thank you for spending the time with us.
Oh, thank you, Chris. This has been a fun interview because you understand the legislative process and what's going on politically. So it was fun to talk to you. God bless you.
It makes me appreciate you. And so far, I want to let people know this is the Kaptain's Table, and they can go on Facebook and find us there with other episodes. And I encourage all of you to do so.